Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th Global Challenges Seminar. It's a series of seminars that we are organizing on topics related to global health, climate change and food security. This year we are particularly pleased to have an excellent team from the UK present and launch, in fact, a new study that we commissioned, essentially as part of WIPO Green, a new platform that we launched last November, of which, in fact, Cambridge IP, the authors, are a partner. And we have also colleagues here from other organizations, ICTSD and UNEP, both of which are also partners of WIPO Green, that will provide a comment, an initial comment to the study. Everything is being recorded for your information. It will be available for archived viewing by you, by your friends, and I promised Sarah that if she makes really a stellar performance, which she always does, that the video will even go viral. So I count on your support to share the video link with your friends and colleagues.
Thank you.
But seriously, having had a bit of a laugh is, of course, always good in order to sharpen our mind again and come back to the real substantial issues. The study, in my view, the Global Challenges Brief, which summarizes for policymakers in really 2 pages with some points of reflection and further thought, and then the detailed study on some 40 pages, is, in my view, a really informative and excellent piece of work that will undoubtedly infuse WIPO Green and the projects that we hope will come off the ground with some really interesting and also new directions. There are lots of players, but I don't want to give away all the great findings since we have the 2 lead authors here. But I just thought I wanted to share with you my enthusiasm for this excellent study. So, having had the privilege of opening the seminar, I will hand over to Anja von der Ropp to chair the rest of the meeting. She will also introduce the speakers, the respondents, and then coordinate or manage the discussion with you. I will step away so you have more space here to brief. Thank you very much.
One way. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So, welcome again, and we're very happy to be here with the 2 main authors of this new study. And maybe I go ladies first. Sarah Helm is a senior associate with Cambridge IP, and she mainly manages the production of IP landscape reports of Cambridge IP, US and European energy, clean technology, telecom and IT clients. And I also read that she has a background in environmental geosciences. So she's well placed to do that pattern landscape. And then there's also Quentin Tannock, the chairman of Cambridge IP, who has led Cambridge IP from its outset. And I also read that he's a co-inventor of a patent on nanotechnology and biomedical diagnostic patents. So he also knows a bit what he's talking about. So we're very happy. And please go ahead presenting the study, and then I'll introduce our respondents later on.
Okay, thank you very much. So, hello everyone. I'm Quentin Tannock from Cambridge IP, and I'm very, very pleased to be here presenting around this report that we've produced on climate change and mitigation technologies. I thought I'd start off by giving a little bit of background to our work, just to put it in context, and then I'll hand over to Sarah to take us through some key findings before coming back in again around some of the implications and considerations for policymakers. So, climate change is one of the most significant global challenges of our time. And it's my view that the technologies already exist to solve the challenges of climate change. Our challenge is in deploying these technologies. In some cases, adapting them for deployment, but in other cases, they're already ready for deployment. Now, patents in some industries are critical means of transferring technology. They're critical means for defining value and transferring value, almost like a form of currency, if you like. And patent landscapes can give incredibly detailed and useful information about what is happening in those industries, both in terms of technology developments, so commercial innovations that businesses believe are worth protecting, but also in terms of markets and applications. So they have a lot of information in the patent documents. But it's important to note that patents and patent landscapes only tell part of the story. There are a number of factors and features, of course, in addition to patents and patent landscapes that make a successful failure of a technology development exercise and a technology transfer exercise. So in this study, in addition to looking at the 4 focus areas and the patent landscapes in the 4 focus areas, we made an effort to include information on investments in the spaces and on other market features of the spaces. We also included some case studies in each of the areas, just to try and give an illustration of how patents are used, how patent landscape information is relevant in these particular spaces. So whilst we're going to present now an overview of findings, of trends, key players, and so on around the 4 areas, I would encourage you to look in the report and look at the contextual information and the case study information by way of further illustration. So which are the technologies that we looked at? Well, we considered biofuels. And biofuels are technologies that take feedstock that is of non-fossil origin, so hasn't been in the ground for ages and compressed over time, for the production of various fuels and hydrocarbons. We will discuss some of the features of the biofuels space and technologies a little bit later in the presentation. We also looked at solar thermal. And solar thermal is a suite of technologies that harness the heat from solar energy and use this to generate energy, energy from heat. That can be contrasted with solar photovoltaic or PV systems, which was another area where we focused. And PV systems use a range of components and are translating sunlight into electricity. Our final focus area was wind energy. Wind energy systems take kinetic energy from wind and translate this into electrical power. There is a lot more information in the report itself on how we defined these technology spaces and their components and the subcomponents that make them up. And it is typical in modern technology systems that the systems are comprised of components, often from a range of different industry areas, and at each component area can be the subject of patents and patent applications. And a good example of this is wind. So in the wind industry, for example, materials that were used in the wings of aircraft become the materials that are used in the blades of the wind turbines. So in the wind industry, we see players coming, for example, from the aerospace sector, entering the wind space. Also in the wind sector, we see that software control systems are important for stopping blades stalling in periods of low wind, for example. So we see players from the ICT sector coming into the wind space. And this is typical of most modern technology systems, most modern technology value chains. It's not something that's special to wind or special to, say, biofuels or other focus areas. But I think it's important from the policy perspective to understand the different industries, industry cultures, industry strategies which are potentially at play in the diverse range of spaces that we focused on. So now my plan is to hand over to my colleague Sarah to go through some of the findings, initially at a high level and then at a slightly lower level around the focus spaces, before we come back to some of our key conclusions. So over to you, Sarah.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, the very kind words. We were very excited by the study and we're very excited to launch it here today. What I want to start off with is what I would say probably the key finding or the key trend, which is strong innovation rates and patent filing rates across all 4 key renewable energy sectors. I think one of the most interesting and I guess telling statistics is the innovation of patent filing between these sectors aggregated grew by 24% annually. And if we look at global averages, it outpaced it, which they were just coming in at 6%. So it really shows is there's large investments in every single one of these sectors. And of course, there's variations between each one of those. But I think the key message that's coming across is there's innovation that's continuous, and in the last 5 years, because we looked at those years specifically, it's really started to increase at a near exponential rate. And like I said, we saw it across sectors. The highest rate is solar PV. And so if I'll just, you can look at the graph, you can kind of see here, especially picking up in 2007 and 2008, you can really start to see the high levels of increases coming in across the sectors. And then, like I said, PV coming in very much at the top, which is excellent and interesting and informative. So where are these renewables coming from? Where is this rise coming in? Where are we seeing it? I think there's a lot to be said for the globalization of the market and the growing influence of the Asian markets, not only as filing locations, but also as innovators. One telling statistics, I think, is the 30% of the patents filed between 2006 and 2007 made use of the PCT system. Now, the table, of course, goes into a bit more granular detail about the rise of this. But what we're really seeing, and what I think this statistic is really important to draw out and tease out, is the fact that the innovators and the users of these technologies really see them as a global approach. They see them being disseminated across global markets. They see the value of transferring that technology across a range of different geographies and for a range of different solutions that can be addressed cross-jurisdictionally. And then I did want to bring in China. China accounts for the highest percentage of patent filing locations in biofuels, in solar thermal, and in solar PV. They're increasing, obviously, in wind, but they weren't the highest percentage of filings. So I think something that's telling us is very much the influence that the Chinese market's having. And I know that, I guess, anecdotally, there's a lot to be said for, people hear about China and they really think of the PV market. But I think it's important here to note how much they're influencing renewables across the board. Which is important to kind of look at and understand that the growing influence of the market, not just as a manufacturer, but also as an innovator. This is also, I would say, reflected in the shifting landscape of technology ownership. So one of the things that we did, in addition to looking at just patent filing trends and the locations of those trends, is also looking at the commercial ownership, looking at who is filing these patents, looking at where these patent owners are filing from, what are their headquarters, what are the companies. I think a lot can be aggregated and said from the people that are the companies that are actually investing financially to create this knowledge and disseminate this knowledge at a global level. Of the top 20 companies, and here we'll look at solar PV more specifically, because something that came up is every top technology owner in solar PV was from Asia. That breakdown looks at Japan, Korea, and China. And I think the Japanese market especially, I mean, historically, and when we look in the report, one of the things we looked at as well was Office of First Filings and original locations of filings. And we did see that Japan was had decreased as a percentage or as a concentration of the first filing location. But I think we can see here, especially in the solar industry, the strong historic component of having technology from the outset and then continuing that innovation and continuing to invest in that innovation, and the importance of continuing to protect that invention as well. And I would say that another telling aspect is the solar thermal, where 16 of the top 20 technology owners are new. So I think this is an interesting and striking feature of the technology ownership, and that the landscape isn't stagnant. It isn't the same people innovating and just continuing to practice similar inventions or incremental inventions. It is new entrants coming in. It's a space. These technology spaces are wide open for continued innovation from new players, new geographies. There's a lot of scope and space for innovation, and as I just as we point back to 24% increase, that leaves a lot of room for people to work and people to innovate, and then the technology to transfer and it to be applicable from multiple markets as well. So I think as you have geographical shifts, you also have innovations that are being adapted for specific uses and specific needs, and the importance is people are protecting within that, and then recognizing again that these have global implications, and these global implications need to be transferred, and they need to be protected, and they need to be, their investment can be shared and leveraged through the benefit of these technology documentations. And then I'll come on to biofuels. Now it's interesting because we talk about shifting technology ownership, and I think biofuels really did bring in by the ownership really brought in a key feature, which is each one of these technologies. Well, we like to group renewables in together. We like to say, we can look at renewable energy technology. I think it's important to recognize that each one of them has their own drivers, their own market forces. They have their own, technology transfer mechanisms, and they all have their own timelines. And each one of those needs to be considered within the technology of itself. So, for instance, in biofuels, what we were seeing was actually a large number of research and research in universities were coming up into the top 10. Now, with a space that has historic research, and some people thought, there's a lot of room for commercialization. Absolutely, there is. But I think that something that technology space indicated for us as well was there was still a resurgence of research to be done. As new technologies emerged, as the landscape changed, it became quite open for more research. And then you saw a lot of research partnerships. And one thing that I think was quite beneficial from this technology space is, since it researched back into I guess what would you call more primary R&D for the second phase of biofuels, we did see, and we outlined a couple in the report, some public-private partnerships that, seeing as how previously there had been commercial interest in commercial investment, when it then started to shift back to more primary R&D, there was already the infrastructure in place where companies could then say, pair with a university and really get to use that, I guess, mechanism or infrastructure to go back and then think of a different way of how can we develop these technologies in partnership. And I think there were some really interesting examples and really interesting lessons to be learned for how the biofuels is now taking on some of that more basic R&D and moving it forward and commercializing it forward. And the hope is to potentially also move it in faster, which I think that's a case where you'll want to watch and you want to see how are those partnerships doing. And then I think another feature it also brings in is the importance of, or the capacity for co-ownership and co-invention, and the abilities of these partnerships to really work together and learn from the benefits of each other. So, as Quentin kind of alluded to, there's, patents they tell an interesting story, but they don't necessarily always tell the whole story. But one thing that I think is very striking about patents, we're patents and technologists at heart, is that they're an excellent lens for looking at the technology innovations and the emerging technologies, and they give you quite a good indication of the trends to watch. And they do give a view to the interesting capacity that is emerging. And what we did here is we kind of just outlined, and I don't know if this is, if we want to go into them more specifically because it's quite technology heavy, but we looked at pulling out what was actually going on in each of the industries. And so from a biofuels perspective, what we were, like, as I had mentioned previously, we were coming back to some more primary R&D, especially with algae-related applications. It's going into fuel from waste, then that's going into increasing inefficiency in those areas. With solar thermal, I would say some of the things that we were seeing, there was a lot to be said for the manufacturing process, and there's a lot to be said for consistent or constant innovation in how materials are made, and especially as they relate to heat exchange systems. There's a lot of room for innovation in increasing efficiencies and increasing that way that material is exchanged through the systems. Again, also in control systems, and then I think energy storage does come in at the solar thermal level, but I think energy storage is also something that we find runs throughout, and I think it is an important factor of all renewable energies. That we can agree that energy storage will continue to be an emerging area of technology innovation. As we get on to the other fields that we looked at solar PV. So we looked here, what we were seeing is solar PV is interesting in that it actually has a number of different phases. And I think one of the things that solar PV, and this is probably this is reflected in the high volume, is there are a number of different ways for solar PV to emerge and innovate. So you have your silicon-based technologies, but you also, you have nanomaterials coming into play, you have different types of systems, you have plastics, so there's so many different applications as well of solar. And I think that the ability to explore those different options, I think there's different opportunities there. There's opportunities at a manufacturing level. So how can you manufacture for large integrators, and then how can you manufacture on an individual level as well? So I think solar PV is a space where there's a lot of different materials and ways and, I guess, structures in order to innovate within. And again, we do see that, and within the report, you see that such a large number of innovations really take advantage of this diversity of the materials and of the scope. And then finally we come on to emerging innovations in wind. And here, as Quinta kind of alluded to, wind was one of the more mature technology spaces. So wind benefited from the ability to have technology transfer from previous, from other industries that had more from the outset, had more cross industrial applications that were coming in from, say, in the materials and the methods. But one thing that's interesting is that still meant that there were challenges to be faced for how do you adapt that for energy, and how do you meet those challenges within a different industry, and then how can that technology transfer and that technology network be transferred across? Wind, I think, therefore, also becomes an interesting case study almost, as one of the more mature technologies, in that since it benefited from cross-industrial tech transfer, what can we learn from how that was done, and what can we learn in how the effective mechanisms that were used, and what can we learn in terms of how that was rolled out, and then I would say something about wind as well. It's that you are seeing offshore becoming an emerging player. So this, I think, just really speaks to the interest and the capacity for renewables on a much larger scale. So I think originally onshore, we call onshore, so onshore wind, one of the limitations was the size and the scale, and then I think offshore was really trying to increase that or meet that gap. So that was kind of just a brief overview of the, the trends and some of the key findings. Obviously, all of them are outlined in your Global Challenges brief, and as well as the report for your reading interest. But I guess one thing that that we want to come back to is renewables are rising. Renewables are rising. In the last 5 years, there have been more filings than the last 30 years. So we're seeing large increases in volumes. We're seeing patents become an increasing source of technology intelligence in this space. We're seeing the globalization as well of that technology intelligence. And I think that really comes through when we were looking at key implications and considerations, that you now have this global database of hundreds of thousands of documents that really can benefit a global population to meet this global challenge. And what then comes out is, how do you effectively leverage that, and how do you effectively translate that into knowledge that is answering these questions? Because with all the information that's there, there must be things we can learn. There is things we can learn. It just needs to be translated through to the right audience, which is obviously what we're trying to do here. So key implications. I know we were going to discuss this together. So coming back to technology deployment at a global scale, creating global opportunities and global solutions. So this is kind of just going off what I just said, which was the rise in international filings really does indicate that market penetration and manufacturing are increasingly global pursuits, and therefore they require global considerations. So you can't think of these within just one country fits one technology, or one jurisdiction will benefit one. It's really about how can these, the development and the dissemination of these technologies be eligible for a global market, and how can that information flow effectively and without stop gaps and without issues. How can we really transfer that?
So just a few comments from me. When you think about international technology transfer or international technology deployment, there are some challenges to be met, for example, around standards and standardization. There are also challenges to be met around capacity building. But one of the points we're making on the slide is there can be a need for creating appropriate technology transfer mechanisms and networks. And just a little plug for WIPO Green. This is one of the areas that the WIPO Green platform is trying to assist in and help with, is providing an appropriate, relatively standardized platform for technology owners to promote their technologies, and for those who have needs of the technologies to find them. And initiatives like this, I believe, will be critical to helping foster effective international technology transfer and deployment.
And on that, I was just going to say as well that we recognize that, as I was saying earlier, these patent documents exist as a global library of technology innovation and technology intelligence, but that can't exist in a vacuum. It must be complemented with knowledge networks, with support, and with and support meaning support for a global community, support from people financing, support from there's a number of different ways that it must be supported, and getting on to the mechanisms, which I think we'll touch on again. There is a large scope for effective use of this, and getting the people the people that are creating the technology to also be involved in the deployment in not just the markets of interest to them, but also perhaps lesser developed economies, and how can that be translated through.
So just to pick up on that point, patents and patent landscapes obviously have a vast amount of information in them, and this is information which is in the public domain, and this library can and is being made available to people from all around the world, including to folk from least developed countries. And I think WIPO have got an excellent patent landscaping initiatives that that help with this. But one of the features that we see of these spaces is how different they are and how diverse they are. And I think it's important to look at the granular detail in the patent landscapes to understand the differences. And from a policy-making perspective, for example, we saw how important the universities and research institutes are in the biofuel space. Well, I think that's actually quite an important finding. And it might be necessary to introduce some mechanisms and measures and investments to help sponsor industry, university, industry research institute partnerships in areas like this. That's one of the uses of patent landscapes, is to flag up the areas where there are these kind of needs. And that's some of what we spoke about on this slide.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to give it. Because, yeah, just picking up off that, again, the opportunity for patent landscapes to, like you were saying, identify these and identify also appropriate investment mechanisms. So where is investment needed? Where is it being fostered? Where is it lacking? And really what companies or, you know, what technology owners, what are they doing? And then also by creating this report, and by creating, well, not just this report, but by creating this, I guess, conversation about the emerging innovations, hopefully it creates a platform for people that are working together, or for people that aren't working together, to potentially start working together. So creating almost a forum to discuss what is happening, what is emerging, and you know, there's a sense that sometimes researchers and technologists, and you know, they work in what their fields, and they don't necessarily always do competitive intelligence or due diligence of what else is going on in the field. And so hopefully this will allow the ability to kind of pull back a bit and say, actually, there are multiple people working in the same technology field, and wouldn't it be more effective if there were a bit more capacity for them to have conversations about this and learn from each other and cross over that technology. And then this gets on to the final point, which is the growing demand for a development of market-driven mechanisms for clean technologies. And this is really where I think driving home the point of there needs to be global engagement and discussions of the role of technology. I mean, it's been flagged time and time again by the UNFCCC, and I think that WIPO Green exactly was developed out of a call for this technology innovation being having an essential role, but really trying to make a market and make a platform where people can, and with credibility, with trust, and with investment, and bringing to the table not just, you know, public policy, but also bringing to the table private investment, people that are really researching into this area, but also the technology users and technology needs. So lesser developed countries that are actually wanting to incorporate technology and just didn't know where and didn't know how to access it before.
Okay, great. So just in closing, to summarize before we hand over to our colleagues to give some responses and reactions, patent activity levels in these renewable energy spaces are rising, and they're rising dramatically. That's both an opportunity and a threat. The opportunity is around information and technology transfer. The threat is around so-called patent thickets and litigations and disputes over technology ownerships. The players in these markets are extremely diverse and now come from around the world. This is very much an international space. Intellectual property ownership is also changing and is diverse, and we believe that there's an increasing need for discourse, but also for specific mechanisms and policies to help address some of the information requirements, but also some of the more tactical implementation requirements around taking these technologies and making them reality in terms of being deployed around the world. So on that note, I wonder if I can conclude and hand over to our commentators.
Thank you very much. Let me also introduce you. There's our first commentator to kick off the discussion with the entire group is Ahmed Abdel Latif, who's a senior program manager at the Innovation Technology intellectual property responsible for innovation, technology, and intellectual property at the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development in Geneva, Switzerland. And his background is he has a diplomatic background and has worked at the permanent mission of Egypt and has followed both WTO and WIPO discussions and deliberations, and is now mainly focusing on environment and energy. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Anja. First, thanks to WIPO for the invitation to be a commentator at this launch. It's a great honor and privilege to be here. And congratulations to WIPO and Cambridge IP for coming up with this report. I enjoyed reading it a lot. Very useful information, very clear, very well structured, friendly to read for policymakers. And also, I would like to mention, I appreciated the fact that it refrained from policy prescriptions, actually. And I think it is often mentioned when this is not the case, but I think it should also be mentioned that when we find something that is really neutral and presents that data. And as you know, the policy debate on these issues is quite polarized. So I think it is for the key actors and countries to really use this data for better informing their discussions. So that is my kind of general appreciation for this report. My second point actually is methodological, and I know that you did not get into the methodology issue in your presentation, and I understand it because it can be sometime a bit technical, but given that we as ICTSD have done a bit of work in this area, this is an issue that we dealt with and interests us, and I'll just mention it briefly because I think it is important. I was happy to see that in your explanation of the methodology, you refer to the use of, in the context of patent searches, you refer to the previous study we did with the European Patent Office and the use of the EPO classification Y02 on clean energies. And I think this is important, and not just in terms of that we were involved in that exercise that led to this classification, but it is important in terms of methodological convergence for doing these studies. Because I think it's one of the problems we had with the earlier studies in this field. When Cambridge IP did the first report in 2009 with Chatham House, and we did our subsequent report, because of the methodological issue, we did not have exactly the same findings, for example, on top country technology owners, right? We had Japan as the top technology owner, and you had US. So I think that just to close on this, I think this moves us forward in that you have really added to the ladder of the knowledge on this issue, and we will then be adding, hopefully, or on this knowledge. So we're all kind of really at the end concurring to the same task of improving the global state of knowledge on these very critical issues. So that is why the methodology is important. My third comment then is some comments on the general findings and on this changing geography of innovation in developing countries, which is particular interest to us. So I think that the key finding that is very interesting is this growth of patenting of 24% annually over the years you described. Despite the financial crisis, despite stagnation in private sector investment in renewables and even some decrease in it, taking into account also that a lot of the feed-in tariff programs have been either stopped or being phased out. And all these measures were behind a lot of the renewable energy drive. So this is interesting to put these two issues in contrast. And I think one explanation might be the fact that R&D investments and R&D research is planned much more ahead in terms of the number of years. So maybe that why explains a bit maybe why the patenting rates are high. But within this issue, in trying to explain these 24%, I would have maybe one of the things that would have maybe like a little bit more of elaboration in the report and interest us in particular. Then the question is, what are the drivers of innovation, right? What are the drivers of innovation? Is it government expenditure? Is it, well, the feed-in tariffs I've said have been, some of them have been phased out. So this, I think, remains a question that can be further elaborated on. So that was on the growth of the patenting rate. Another issue I found fascinating is this contrast between patenting, industrial capacity, and deployment, right? And you find that those scoring high on one are not necessarily scoring high on the other one. And you've mentioned this, but it's just really fascinating. And it really, I think, also calls for further reflection. You take biofuel. I mean, we all know that Brazil has the biggest biofuel ethanol program in the world, and yet Brazil does not figure in the top biofuel technology owners, right? And I think they're even aware of that in discussions with them, and they're really behind, notably in third-generation patenting of biofuels. So this is one striking example. The second, and this comes very clear out of your study, is the PV and China, right? China then has the highest industrial capacity probably in PV, but does not figure, again, in the top technology owners, right? And this is, again, very striking if we put these three together. And even in China, we know that in terms of trade, in PV, we have all these trade disputes. You know, so this is, again, as you said, we have one piece of the puzzle. Interesting to put it in light with other pieces of the puzzle. So this was another point. My next point is on this issue then of emerging economies and the changing geography of innovation. I know this is a very popular theme, and it's present everywhere. And I'm a bit of a skeptic, relatively, in that. I mean, I think the figures are interesting. Clearly, there is a growth of patent applications in China and in Asia. But again, let us look closer, right? So. The first one I find interesting, and I think that's why the listing of technology owners is very useful. If you look at the gap between the patent families of the top technology owners and the following ones coming from China or emerging economy, it's 1 to 10 or 1 to 20, right? So it's not only who's in the top 20, but what is the contrast between the their patent applications and patent holding. And like in wind, you find GE with more than 600 patent families, and the next Chinese one with less than 100, PV 1,100 again. So that is one interesting observation. The second one, in terms of indication of patent quality, of patent or of inventiveness or technologies, you know, I like this a lot. There's reference to triadic patents, right? Patents who are granted by the three big offices, right? Japan, EPO, and the United States. And looking at, if you look at the number of Chinese patents among the triadic patents, you find a much smaller proportion than in contrast to the huge rise in Chinese patent filings, etc. And maybe again, I'm not a specialist of patent statistics, etc. And probably it's too soon to have these kind of measures because it's patents granted. But maybe this is also something maybe in the future to look at. My final comments are really on the sectors, and I think the findings on the IP concentration on the sectors is very interesting. My biggest surprise was the biofuels sector, that this is the least IP concentrated. And I think that is a very interesting finding that you came up with, because many of the previous studies that I've read, and including the 2007 one that we had done with John Barton, who looked at biofuels, and it points out to a high concentration of industry players in biofuel innovation and R&D, right? And if you think about we're looking at a sector that is close to a bit to the chemistry and the pharma sector and the biotech sector, and these sectors tend to be highly concentrated. So that is, maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. I found it very interesting. And finally, just also I found very interesting what you mentioned at the end on if we compare the presence of research institutions in the different areas, and in biofuels, then it's not surprising, because in biotech, in all these fields, that require heavy R&D and fundamental research, etc., you have a lot of public players and research institutions, because we're less at the commercial end of things. So the commercial maturity of the sector relates to also the presence of universities and research centers. But again, as I said when we were talking before, these are comments a bit at the margin, and I think in general it's a very useful study for policymakers, for the community of people who are following this issue. So again, congratulations to both WIPO and Cambridge IP. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I feel that everyone wants to engage in the discussion. So just our last sort of informal commentator, Joachim Monkelbahn, who is a senior consultant on trade and green economy. He works in the economics and trade branch of the United Nations Environment Program, Geneva, Switzerland, just recently, but he has also worked for several other organizations as a consultant, has intensive background on those issues. So we're happy to have you here and looking forward to your comments. Thanks.
Thank you for your introduction, and a special thanks to WIPO for inviting UNEP to comment on this Global Challenges report, which is indeed very rich in data. And so I would like to commend Cambridge IP for that. First of all, I need to tell you that suddenly I might disappear after 5 minutes, because when I was sitting down here, Anatole said that there's a flap in the ground. And after 5 minutes of talking, I will disappear in cold water. So just for your information. So to start off with, where does UNEP come from here? Of course, UNEP is promoting the transition to a green economy. And innovation, especially in environmental technologies and clean energy technologies, is a crucial sector. So UNEP has been actively involved in this field for some time now. For example, we took the initiative together with the European Patent Office and with ICTSD for a new patent classification for climate change mitigation technologies. And you can find more information on this new classification in the report. Actually, it's in a box on page 13 of the report. So, as I only have 5 minutes, I thought I have 5 points to make. And so if I neatly make each point 1 minute, I might survive this. My first point is that property rights as indicators for innovation are fine, but they're only part of the story, as Sarah just told us. So traditionally, innovation is measured in terms of property rights and spending on R&D, and that's also how this report works. But the question is, can we find better indicators for innovation? So we need measures, alternative measures, because innovation is not always subject to property rights. And innovation is not only a function of the volume of patent application, it's also a matter of the quality of the patents. So second issue is that comparison with overall innovation activity in all industry, it's fine, but it can give a bit distorted picture, because we compare it also to traditional industries that are in decline. So it would be worthwhile to compare patent activity in clean energy, for example, with patenting in biotechnology and in the IT sector, which is also growing rapidly. And also it might be useful to compare patenting activity in the renewable energy sector with patenting in the non-renewable energy sector. Second point is the scope of the study, and the scope could be a bit broader, we think. For example, the case studies are limited to a few big companies in each of the 4 climate change mitigation technologies. And the transition to green economy will necessitate taking on board also smaller actors, such as small and medium-sized enterprises. And actually, it's in the SMEs where most of the innovation takes place. The third point is getting a wider understanding of innovation. And Ahmed has already mentioned that we need to look at the real drivers of innovation. The drivers of growth and of innovation, they used to be cheap labor, cheap natural resources and finance, but they are unlikely to be the main drivers of growth for the future. So we need to look at new drivers of growth and of innovation in the coming decades. And counterintuitively, growth could lie in ecosystem and other resource constraints, which necessitate different types of innovation. So we not only need technological innovation, which this report is about, but we also need institutional innovation. We need behavioral innovation. Thus, innovation goes beyond technological innovation. And of course, this report had to focus on technology. But in the future, studies on technological innovation that could be embedded in the broader landscape of innovation, which also includes institutional and behavioral innovation. For example, we could look at how people use technologies or what the motivations are for people to use technologies. Or we could also look at the institutional setting, which creates the enabling conditions for example, cooperative innovation and technology transfer. My fourth point is the so-called which way around question, or the nature of innovation question. So to illustrate this, I will take the example of China. For me, the most striking data which I found in the report were on the rise of China in the field of clean technology innovation. But the question is whether a company first decides to manufacture in China, and that's why they apply for a patent there, or is the innovation in China and the application of a patent there the result of the manufacturing process in China, because a major part of innovation results actually from manufacturing. Always we easily distinguish between manufacturing and innovation, and we can say, okay, a group of countries A, they will do the innovation in the future and they focus on innovation and education, and the group of countries B will do the manufacturing. But it's not that easy to distinguish because manufacturing and innovation are so closely linked. And we haven't seen this question really addressed in this report. And we would also be very interested to see how much innovation is really indigenous in China and in other countries. For example, in the US, apparently 60% of the patents are the result of indigenous innovation, and 40% are the result of innovation that has been done outside of the US. So my fifth and final point, it's an additional bigger picture point, which is that we should also look into the role of public procurement as a driver for innovation. Sustainable public procurement is a very powerful tool which allows governments to leverage public spending, and actually public spending is in many countries up to 30% of GDP. And they could leverage this spending to promote the country's social, environmental and economic policies. And sustainable government procurement also contributes to creating markets for environmental technologies and to innovative solutions. So we need to work out the linkages between sustainable public procurement and innovation, especially in the clean energy sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So where do we stand? 2:45. Maybe I sensed that there was also an initiative to react directly, so I would like to give you a chance to do so if you wish, and then open the floor to the entire audience and broaden the discussion.
Absolutely.
So let me take a first stab at it. That's okay. So, Ahmed, thank you very much. I absolutely agree with your point about the repeatability of these studies, and that's something we aimed at in this initiative, that we want this work to be able to be repeated by others and to be able to be maintained, and we'd love to be working with you and others around those kind of initiatives in the future. And just to cherry pick on a few things that both of you said, I absolutely agree that it's really important to understand the drivers for innovation. We only had the ability to go a certain way to provide information to a certain level around some of the drivers and some of the market factors and features and so on. It would be absolutely fantastic to be able to do some additional work under putting some more granular case studies in place and understanding more of the broader context around what's driving some of the stuff in these IP landscapes. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. And you mentioned towards the end of your comments something really important, I think, which is around what you called indigenous innovations and where are the innovations arising. And this is a type of analysis which we're doing quite frequently now, is looking at where are innovations arising, and are they arising from within a country, or are they arising from participants outside a country, then filing within that country. And I think that's another very, very important factor that could be explored further and in more depth in another study of this nature. And just thank you both for the obvious time that you've spent looking at this and thinking about it. It's really great. Thank you.
Yeah, and similarly, I appreciate the review and the excellent comments, and I think there are a number of points that brought up, and maybe we can carry it over to not a discussion. But one thing I did want to touch on, obviously, as Quinta mentioned, the methodology, I agree. It's the point where, as you said, adding to the ladder of knowledge is where we're trying to get to, and we want to use the tools available and recognize as and where those exist for us to elaborate on and build a knowledge base that policymakers can use, because that is what we're doing this for. I think there's a lot of on patents, there's a lot of different aspects and ways to research, to look at patents, and I think, as Quinta mentioned, this study was one. There were limited abilities to do it, but we're more than open to understanding and doing more, because I think there's a lot to be said. And then your point on biofuels, and maybe this we can carry on outside of this forum, but interestingly, and as we elaborated on in the case study, the concentration, I think, was very much a factor of what was going on in the market. So you saw a lot of investment and divestment, and biofuels being something that's able to be independently generated, and how that applies to different markets. And I think that was exactly a case where looking at the technology specifically within its own context was quite important, and especially within what's been happening recently.
Yeah. I think the point for me about a space like biofuels is it makes the point that these are dynamic, living sort of landscapes. Technologies and innovation don't stand still. Their progress is being made all the time, which is why we need to keep up to date. So thank you. It's great.
Well, let me then open the floor to, are there any reactions from the audience? Please, and identify yourself.
Okay, I'll try to speak loud. Yeah, okay. My name is Vladimir Josifov. I'm a former WIPO staff, and since 7 years I'm a private consultant on intellectual property management and technology transfer. And I'm very pleased to hear the presentation, because I may say that I helped Cambridge IP to be introduced to WIPO many years ago. So I'm pleased that WIPO is using this very precious resource. And thank you also for the comments from ICTSD and UNEP. I think it's a very interesting thing, and I want to catch up on the last point which was made by Quentin. This is a dynamic issue. A patent landscape is a snapshot in time. And if we want to see really the development, we have to repeat the same exercise in 1 year or 2 years to see how things are developing. And we are speaking about patent filings. Patent filings, everyone of us knows that it is the origin of the innovation, but we don't know what is the practical implication. Not all the patent filings will result in national patents, and this is really the interesting thing for me in the future, whether all this what has been identified here will result in patents, and will this give somebody, a company or a country, a dominant position on the market. Also, you'll see from the target countries of applications where it has been where the applications have been targeted, whether they are targeted to Europe, whether they are targeted to Asia. We know about the origin in Asia, but we don't know whether this is the target in Europe, North America, or in developing countries. We always speak about the gap in patent filing in the industrialized world, in developing countries. It is still 90 to 10%. I think not more than 10%, probably with China now increasing number of applications, it comes to 15 to 20%. But this is something important to know, because the transfer of technology depends on whether one or another technology has been protected in a target country. And this is something where I would encourage WIPO and the other organizations to follow up on this, because this would be a very good service to developing countries to know what happened after this snapshot in time in 1 or 2 years, which really resulted in national patents and which could be used for technology transfer. Also, a very important issue was the question of where the innovation originates, whether it is in national innovations or whether it is foreign companies residing in the country. This is also very important to know, but this can be easily identified. And I would like to ask a question: what is the basis of the patent database which you have? Are you using the EPO patent database or the WIPO PCT patent database? This is also very important to know, because if there are certain countries which are excluded, then these countries have to be targeted specifically. For example, I think of India, Brazil, which are part of the PCT database, but not always the national applications are reflected in the PCT or the WIPO database or in the EPO database. And the last thing which I would suggest, it's very nice, WIPO has done a number of patent landscape, but I doubt whether industry is aware that such landscapes have been done. I think it would be a very easy exercise if I see the companies which are listed here to send them an email and say, okay, listen guys, we did such landscape, you are ranking number 5, you are ranking number 3, you are ranking number 10, just for information. This would generate some interest on the industry side, which is very important, because in fact it's not the research or the government which promotes innovation, it's industry. And industry, if industry sees that there is an interest on the international level, they may come back and may ask for additional research or studies or provide additional information, which will be very, very useful, in particular for this issue of the transfer of technology in the clean energy sector and in the increasing the technology, the new technology used in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I see there's one.
Okay. Well, good afternoon to all, and thank you very much for the presentations. And I have two questions, actually. One related to the... Roberto Recalde from the Permanent Mission of Paraguay here in Geneva. And, well, I was saying that I have two questions. One related to the policy prescriptions. I can understand why the study should not address this kind of issues, but I would be interested in having your, the whole panel, commentators and people from Cambridge IP to have their views on this kind of negotiations, if we should have new negotiations or bilateral, plurilateral, or if there is no need for negotiations, and in that case, I don't know, maybe enhance the PCT system or have more flexible mechanisms such as the PCT system, and given the dynamic evolution of all these areas. And well, the second question is related to what other areas are related to the climate change. I'm thinking about hydroelectric dams and that kind of issues, but maybe you can refer to other areas briefly. Thank you.
So thank you both for your comments and questions. So just to quickly address them in the order that they were given to us. Vladimir, I absolutely agree with you that keeping up to date with this is critical and is important. One of our objectives is to create and maintain a database in near to real time of information around these and other interesting technology areas. But I think we're a little way away from that at this point. Of course, when we do updates, we need to perhaps go into a little bit more granular detail if there's the time to do so. I also thought your point around the use of the PCT system and using the PCT system to understand the potential commercial value that's being placed on patents is an interesting one, and one I'm sure that WIPO will be delighted to hear that you're thinking about. You asked about the databases we use. The databases we use are listed in the methodology section of the report itself, but in really brief overview, Cambridge AP maintains its own database of patents and patent applications from around the world. We have more than 100 million in our datasets. We buy data in from leading commercial providers. But because of the repeatability point that's been made several times on this panel, all of the statistics, graphs and so on, information in this report, we drew from the EPO's PatStat system. And this is so that the findings we have are comparable and are repeatable. If we were to have used our own internal bespoke databases, which might have greater coverage and more documents in them, it would be difficult for others to repeat the work because we own that data; it's internal to us. So that's answering those. Coming on to the questions from Paraguay, with other areas that need to be considered. Well, absolutely, this is simply a really small selection of clean technology areas, of course, and we would love to go deeper and further. There is some work that we contributed to that's been done by the European Patent Office recently, with particular respect to clean technologies in Latin America. So it might be worth looking out for that Latin American report. Sarah, has that been published yet, that report?
No. There's been a brief released, but...
okay, so they've released a two-page briefing, but the full report hasn't been released yet, but that will be coming out. Your point around the negotiations, and do we need new negotiations and so on, I suppose my only reaction to that is coming from our perspective as innovation and technology consultants. We see these spaces as being incredibly diverse and very different to each other. We become nervous when policymakers and clients are talking about one-size-fits-all policies to address all of climate change, for example, because the spaces are so different. As folk have been pointing out, the drivers are different, the players are different, they come from different industries, the geographical markets are different. And I know this is unfortunately no real answer to your question. I may be adding more problems, but these are complicated spaces and technologies. There may be some one-size-fits-all solutions, but I don't believe there are, in a general sense, one-size-fits-all policies or solutions. So my only comment really is that we probably need negotiations, but at a granular level and that are well informed about the different industry spaces. Thank you.
Just to add to that, a point on the selection of the technology focus areas, I can say that as we had limited scope to do it, we picked the 4 with the highest volumes. So that was what that decision was made initially. So there was a reason for it. Of course, we see the value in incorporating others, and as such, we will move into those hopefully. But that was the, I guess, methodological reason for in answer to your question. And the other thing that I was going to say was on this policy prescription point. I guess one thing that I would say would be the importance of technology and technology information being incorporated into the discourse, which I think we can start to really see signs of with, for instance, CTCN networks and WIPO Green and things like that, because I think the integration of the knowledge that backs up technology, so it's not just commenting on the policy side, but really coming from a data and a policy perspective, which was pointed out, that letting the data speak for itself and letting that knowledge be translated, and the importance of that. I mean, I guess I think that that's a prescription in of itself, that the need for more empirically based information to formulate and translate into these policies.
So, very short comments also from your side, and then I noted two requests for speak. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm quite glad that the issue of technology transfer has finally come up, which is almost impossible to dodge in this kind of discussion. I fully agree with Quentin that, first of all, the needs in developing countries especially are very diverse. So how to go about? I think, first of all, one option always is more international negotiations. But what we also need to do is to make the institutions that we have already and the mechanisms that we have to make them work. For example, we have the Climate Technology Center and Network, and we need to make those work. And in terms of private sector cooperation, we need more focus on open innovation and cooperative innovation. I think this will be an interesting topic to focus on in the future for when we look at innovation, especially in the clean energy sector, because often it's more a matter of cooperation on technology development than a matter of the simple transfer of technology from one country to another. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, on the policy question, I mean, I agree with what has been said about the diversity of technologies, of situations, the complexity. We think it's not, I mean, as complexity and diversity have never kind of been an obstacle to negotiate and internationally. I mean, so the question is how to approach these issues. And this is where we think it needs to be approach, take into context the diversity, using a bottom-up approach, using a gradual approach, going on from existing tools, existing measures, practical measures that can be used to promote diffusion of green technologies, and going from there up to other measures if needed, right? And some of the measures we have worked on include, for example, licensing, that we think it's an area, licensing of technologies, how that happens, how can that be enhanced. Some countries we have done work on fast-tracking green patent applications. You know, that is also another practical measure. So let's look at these, how they work, and move from there on. And we have written specifically elaborated on how to approach the negotiations on this issue. I would be happy to share these publications with you if, maybe after the meeting. Thank you.
So there was one speaker from here, and then Pedro afterwards, and then it would be your turn. Yeah, exactly here. But he would start, and
okay.
Then.
So there, voila. Yes, thank you. This may be a bit of a tangent, but I'm Max Dilley. I'm from the World Meteorological Organization, which may explain the gist of my question. It strikes me that some of these technologies have quite a heavy environmental input to them. Obvious things like wind speeds that would determine where you could site the turbines, and sun days, insolation, maybe extreme events, hailstorms that could damage solar installations, etc. And I know it's a bit outside the scope of the study, but just having looked into these things, some of these information inputs therefore probably have some kind of a commercial value. And I can tell you that many meteorological services are really struggling with this, because they are required often to maintain the observing systems that all of this data eventually comes from. But yet the commercialization doesn't often bring back any revenues and resources to maintain those systems. So they often just kind of keep the data, and yet there's we know from our interactions with the private sector some demand to get this information because it is useful. So maybe I'm making a parallel with the human genome, trying to patent the human genome as a basis for developing gene therapies or something, but I just wondered to what extent these intellectual property issues might extend to data that could be relevant for market development or for the design of some of the systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Pedro Roffe from ICTSD. Well, thank you for this study. I have a question just to clarify my understanding. Well, this is an extremely useful piece of work, and thank you very much. But looking at the data, maybe I'm wrong or I don't understand very clearly the complexities of classifications and patent statistics. But if I look at figure 2 and then I look at table 2, in pages 4 and 5, in figure 2, in the first period until 2005, biofuels has 14% of the total. It comes down in the second period, 2006-2011. Then it's a question, really. If I look at table 2 and I look at the PCT applications, I see that biofuels occupies a very important rank in patent application under the PCT. Well, I was just wondering to try to understand for somebody that is not strictly familiar with all these complexities.
Well, my name is Yue Zhang, and I come from China. Currently, I'm visiting at University of Lausanne. Thank you very much for the research and for the report. I'm very proud of to see China is transferring from the world factory to the innovator. And regarding the report, I think it may be in the near future, maybe it's nice to compare the policy and maybe regulation across different countries to include that, because China really pushing the innovation in green technology and also in smart city, which will apply the green technology. And secondly is there is a lot of disputes on the international trade regarding the solar panel in the recent years. And this may have some impact, of course, kind of negative impact, especially with the US and with the EU as well. In the recent years. And last but not least is to see the technology transfer from university and also institutions to the industries to see I'm not sure whether it's possible to look at this dynamic, maybe in the near future to see this kind of dynamic in the report. Because I think the structure of the report is quite replicable in the future. And maybe in 3 years or in 5 years, another report can be made on this kind of framework. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other at the moment, then I'll let you react again.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. I'll start in reverse order, if I may. I think absolutely appreciate your points, and I think policy and regulation have historically been key drivers in these renewable energy spaces. I mean, sort of most famously, if you look at the feed-in tariffs in Germany, in the early years, they really drove up the adoption of renewable energies in Germany, for example. So I think absolutely in a broader study, which has additional market information and driver information, absolutely we must look at policies and regulations. And I absolutely take your point about university and corporate or research institute and corporate activities and R&D activities. I think it's absolutely critical. And from a policymaker perspective, it could be, in fact, that university-developed innovations and university-developed R&D are kind of soft entry points, if you like, from a technology development and technology transfer perspective. It may be easier to work with universities on collaborative R&D, for example, than some big competitive major corporates, potentially. To come back to the first question then, and I'll leave my colleague Sarah to deal with the methodological question. Am I right that you were asking about forms of IP protection that are available for the data that comes from the meteorological institutes around the world? Is that your question?
A bit. I'm just wondering to what extent the whole issue, the basic fundamental problem is if and how to commercialize this data, which has potentially commercial value. And I'm just wondering to what extent the same issues that cover and facilitate the development of the technology with intellectual property protections, if and how they might apply to these data resources, which are also relevant for the overall industry.
Sure. So without giving legal advice, because I'm not a lawyer, there are a range of forms of IP protection that are available for these kind of data. In some countries, you can patent methods. Certainly in Europe, there is protection for databases themselves and IP held in databases. And throughout the world, software is traditionally protected through mechanisms like copyright and so on. But it is, at least traditionally, slightly more difficult to get registered intellectual property rights around databases and software. And in short, yes. I mean, most of the drivers and implications that underpin a lot of these sectors would, I imagine, be relevant and applicable to your space. Be great to have a chat with you after this, actually, about what you see and what some of the different stations around the world are telling you about what problems they have.
So two things. The first, to address the data or methodological point, I think that the confusion or the question is this figure 2 is looking at the concentrations or the sectors in relation to one another, whereas and the trends as in comparison to one another, whereas table 2 is looking at them within their sectors. So I believe that might, because as you do see the drastic increase, which I don't know if anyone's looking, but maybe we can discuss it afterwards. But then that's within sectors, and this is in comparison to sectors to each other. So it's looking at different aspects, if that makes sense. But perhaps we could go to it afterwards. And then I just wanted to make one more comment on the meteorological, the point on how can commercial value for inputs to things that could be impacted by, say, like you were saying, like a hailstorm, and how that information can then be translated commercially. I would just say, as each renewable energy technology were to be commercialized on a more global scale and taken up, I would say that, as we're already seeing big data and the interest in data and how data feeds into platforms that companies operate as commercial providers, I think that's probably, it'd become a data integration question, and I think there'd be a large space for IT system and data systems to be built up and to be creating information platforms for these kind of service operators. And so I think there's a lot of scope and space for that to be included as these technologies become more of a factor of the commercial ecosystem.
Okay, so then Anatol, please.
Thank you. I have really two comments, one specifically on figure 2 and table 2, and then also to yours, which I think is very interesting. Figure 2 gives the proportion of the different technologies, and it's in fact in relation to the first line, the number of patent applications. So it's the percent of that first line. But the percent expressed on table 2 is the percent of PCT of the total within each one. So they provide similar information but different ones. Well, visualization of an element of the table, of the figures from table 2. On the other question or comment, it's very interesting, I think, to go back to the purpose first of the patent system. It's that quid pro quo. You disclose everything that information becomes public domain in exchange for limited restrictions for a number of years. And I think there's a time when certain data has to be a public good, made available as a public good. That can be done after copyright. So one protects it and then makes it available, provided that the data itself then is continued to be made freely available. There are lots of applications that are then built on that meteorological data, from TV to iPhone apps to a whole range of services where, in fact, industry then, Cambridge IP is an example of it as well. They collect publicly available public goods data, so to speak, but the way they make it available, that's where the added value comes in, and where I think lots of people like us depend on that kind of information. On my iPhone app, on the weather application, especially in the last few days, was particularly useful, built on your freely available data. And I think once too much of the original raw data becomes privatized, then it may actually stifle innovation that further down leads to many fewer services. So it's through that mix of public and private innovation that society at large benefits from tremendous innovation. So I would not necessarily urge you to consider too much protection. I don't know, I'm not providing legal advice either, but just trying to balance that the two are working wonderfully together in a certain organized and structured manner. I just thought that point was worth making. Thank you.
Interestingly, as you said, Cambridge IP can be an example of this. Another one that might be closer would be, think of Arctic surveys and how those applications are being commercially translated for everything through to the shipping industries, through to other people, research associations. So that's another example, and I think maybe more closely aligned, where you had a large source of public information from, say, satellite data from governments, and now you have the commercial interest and how those platforms and as Anatole referenced, service industry is built on top of that, and it's important to have both factors. And yeah.
I realize this is probably a topic for another meeting, but the fundamental issue, going back to the previous point also, is that the observing systems, which are needed for a great variety of applications, among which include the ability to detect the degree of climate change which is occurring, which is not exactly a commercial application at all, but it's of fundamental importance for virtually everybody.
Yeah.
Those observing systems are actually degrading right now. So the big issue is to create a financial model for the whole package, which includes, as you said, the commercial sort of value added, but also the maintenance of the basic infrastructure that feeds the whole thing. And there is a disconnect there somehow, and this is probably what we could pursue later at some other point. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm just not sure if the IP system is meant to address that. It may be more an issue of public policy to address where the value really is, where the value is captured, and how governments respond in order to maintain the chicken that lays the golden eggs, or the goose that lays the golden egg, really, which enables that data, that infrastructure that is needed. Yeah. I'm just putting that out as a question. One often blames the IP system for failures that in fact have nothing to do with the IP system per se. Similarly, the IP system sometimes is looked at because it does generate tremendous value in some contexts. It may not at all be the way to go in other contexts.
Just to add something to this, 20 years ago, a number of patent offices tried to sell their statistical patent information. And then public policy decided that they cannot sell it because it's a publicly good collected with public funds. And the best example was the US Patent Office, which refused at all to go into this discussion because there is a clear watershed between what is public property or public domain and what can be. The US Patent Office is not allowed to go into commercial competition with private service providers. They can use the data of the USPTO, however, the USPTO cannot compete with them because it has access to its own data. And here it is, as Anatol said, an important issue of public policy to say, okay, you can use the data, but if you use them in a commercial way, you have to pay. Today, Cambridge IP is buying the data from the patent collections, from EPO, from WIPO, etc., at a price which they negotiate because they get the data updated, and this is a service which is commercial, and this is something which you should discuss with the colleagues who are in charge of it. Thank you.
That's contractual. That's not contract.
Yeah, but it's not IP. It is just
it's contract.
Contract. Yeah, it's nothing to do with IP.
Could you turn off your microphone, Vladimir? Yeah, good. Are there any other comments from the floor? Otherwise, I would give you a last chance to wrap up or provide last comments if you so wish.
Yeah, sorry, just maybe again, I mean, my final, message is the caution on the changing geography of innovation. I forgot to mention one of the in the conclusions and the findings, right? As an indicator of the diversity of players, it is mentioned that, for example, solar PV has the top 20 technology owners based in Asia, right? So that is factually correct. But among these 20, you have 17 who are OECD, Japan, and Republic of Korea, and you have 3 that are from China. So the OECD, non-OECD aspect of things as an indicator of the changing innovation landscape is as important as the geographic location. But that is my point. Thank you.
No, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you very much, everyone, for such really useful and informative comments and questions. It's been a real pleasure. So I was just saying thank you very much, everyone, for your useful comments and questions. This meeting's been a real pleasure. And thank you to WIPO for inviting us and for being such excellent hosts.
Yeah, thank you to WIPO and thank you to everyone, and we welcome your comments as the report is now launched and available. So please get in touch and let us know what you think.
Well, thank you for as the authors, and also thank you to the commentators for having read the study and having provided really good comments. Thank you for engaging in the discussion. I think that discussion really gave us a lot of food for thought, both on the sort of procedural matter issues or sort of the questions on whether this is a useful exercise, and if so, when and how often should we repeat it again. What we've covered is also a matter of course, resources. We've selected clean energy technologies, but of course, I think the person has left who asked about climate change. We have left out all the adaptation completely. So I think what we can do is always also a matter of the resources that we have, and then also I think it would be very interesting to put that even more into context than we've already done. But then again, it's also more difficult to aggregate the data that would be needed to do so. But that's an issue to think about further. But then also, I think there were very interesting thoughts on what would be the implications for technology transfer. And you said the case studies have covered only big companies. So what we're trying to do also from the WIPO Green side is to have case studies coming from sort of the other end of the spectrum, the SMEs, and also collecting and sharing experiences that these entities have had with technology transfer. And I think as WIPO Green develops, the more we will be able to make available as well. and then also this interesting field of biofuels and how we can sort of think about next steps on the basis of that report that you've done. But thank you again for your comments and your engagement, and I think that's been a very successful event for us. Thank you so much.